screaming and terrorizing everyone else because he was filled with Satan. And when Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" and he said, "My name is Legion." There were thousands of these spirit worlds filled with fear. And Jesus walks right up to him and says, "Get out of him." Of course, that fabulous scene of Satan coming out and getting in a whole bunch of pigs and going over a cliff and drowning themselves. That's the Jesus that you and I believe in. A Jesus who calls us to freedom, but who calls us in that freedom to make sure that we don't have any fear. And time again, don't be afraid. Now, I wanted to play around with it a little bit. I've got a board here, and I want to see if maybe we can kind of come up with an understanding of this word. We're talking about fear, aren't we? Now, is that beautiful pen writing, handwriting? Oh, this is great. And I wanted to talk first, as we talk about fear, we're talking about Jesus, aren't we? We're trying to understand Jesus, trying to understand the beauty of him giving us an example, an ability to be able to know through him as he confronts the things of fear, and he shows us what we can do. But then we need to look at our own lives, and let's look at some of the fears that we have. And I'm going to ask if we could do this external. Can you make that out? And then internal. So we got external and we got internal. Let's just kind of, for a moment, let's kind of stop and think about some of those external fears that we have. What's the reality of the world in which we live now with those external fears? Well, I might be afraid of getting on an airplane and going up in the air. Oh gosh, I might be afraid of those heights. I might be afraid of water. I know I've recently gone on one of these fundraising tours where we go down and we have a wonderful cruise and we have a wonderful time sharing the Bible and whatnot. And I mentioned that to a person in the parish, and ooh, I'd love to do it, but I don't want to get in the water. You know? Sometimes we're afraid also of freeways. We're not quite sure if people are going to be able to be secure, and we bump, and so we never get on the freeway. And we're filled with fear. A lot of times we might be filled with a great fear for authority, for policemen, that thing. But in a more practical way, these external things are, for example, darkness. Going into a room where we don't know what's there and there aren't any lights, and we're afraid that we're going to trip over and hurt ourselves. We're also afraid of hospitals. I don't know about you, but so many times I can push off that visit to someone in the hospital, and it maybe is just kind of an internal thing, but that external thought of going to the hospital and knowing that, oh gosh, that's the course that I might have to take when my life goes there, or a nursing home. But when you get down to talking about fear, we can't deny one of the most important fears we face today, and that's terrorism. After 9/11, after the bombing of the World Trade Center, the war in Iraq, the stories that we hear of terrible things happening, and the fear that people are coming and perhaps trying to destroy the security and the peace that we have. These are all these external fears that we have, and they're very, very strong. And it's these fears, and each of you need to kind of think about what are those external fears you have, that Christ is addressing when he comes and says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Let go of some of those external fears. Not that we become, that we don't care about the terrorism and that we don't care about being safe. No, I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about making sure that we aren't overcome by fear because of the security we need, of the example we have of Christ, of being able to deal with those things we fear and in that way finding the peace we're looking for. So, we've looked at the word fear, and we come with that word fear, and we see in Jesus a person calling us away from fear and showing us by his example how we can really live a life of confronting fear. Then we look at our own lives. Each of us has to examine our lives and say, what are some of those things that I'm afraid of, those external things that push me away? But then you come to the internal ones, those things that are on the inside. These are perhaps even more dangerous. These are some of the fears that can really frighten us in a big way. What are some of those internal fears? The fear, for example, of the past. And will the past happen again? I had a marriage and it failed. And is it going to happen again? Or I have bad luck and it seems to be going on in the past, and will it happen to me again? Or the other fear is the fear of the future. The insecurity. I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold on to my job. I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold on to my family. I'm not going to be able to finish my education. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have this peace. And this whole what-if monster of the future becomes a big source of fear. And it just kind of wells out from the inside of our hearts. And fear is a terrible, terrible plague in our life. I've come across a few people whose fear has become overwhelming with regard to anxiety. It's an anxiety that almost immobilizes them. They can't act. And this fear becomes so controlling that they can't find the peace. And they can't hear those words of Christ when he says, hey, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. They can't do that. But there are other internal fears that we struggle. The fear, for example, of telling another person, I love you. The risk of doing that. There are many that are so afraid of risking doing that because of the involvement that it might